All right, good afternoon. The UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees, better known as UNRWA, said today in a press release that the ministerial meeting that was held yesterday raised a remarkable $122 million for the agency. Kuwait, the European Union, Germany, Norway, France, Belgium, and Ireland announced additional funding commitments. The meeting represented a crucial step to overcome the agency's remaining shortfall of $186 million and sustain UNRWA's operations in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, Gaza, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. The agency's Commissioner General, Pierre Kranbuhl, thanked member states for their extraordinary support and said the meeting was a moment of commitment and solidarity with Palestinian refugees. He said the results of the New York meeting, added to the support received from other partners this year, representing a very significant achievement. Press release is available, and a reminder that the Secretary General also attended that meeting. The Secretary General this morning spoke at the meeting of the Pacific Islands Forum leaders. He noted the Pacific Islands are on the front lines of climate change, which he sees as absolute priority, adding that the region's voices and experiences are pivotal. The Secretary General recognized that the Pacific region is vulnerable to disasters, commending recent government-led responses to such tragedies, with several countries moving closer to meeting the graduation criteria for the category of least developed country. He stressed that the UN system is committed to ensuring that these countries continue to have the support to continue a sustained path to development and prosperity. And last night, we issued a statement expressing the Secretary General's sadness to learn of the loss of life in flooding caused by heavy seasonal rains in Nigeria. The Secretary General extended his condolences to the families of the victims and the government and people of Nigeria. And that statement is online. And our humanitarian colleagues in Syria tell us that the military campaigns against Daesh in the northeastern rural Deir ez-Zor area in the country has resulted in the displacement of 30,000 people since June. The situation of internally displaced people in makeshift camps is reportedly dire, with lack of access to health care, water, sanitation, and hygiene, and other services. Displaced people are reportedly in poor health and need urgent medical care. Some children and women are reportedly suffering from dyspnea, difficult or labored breathing due to dust and heat. The UN continues to provide assistance to those in need, and this Wednesday, the UN dispatched food, nutrition, water, sanitation, hygiene sufficient for 5,000 people who are internally displaced to the area. Additionally, on the 25th, a mobile clinic provided health service in the Garjanjij area. Yesterday, the Deputy Secretary General spoke on behalf of the Secretary General at the third high-level meeting on the prevention and control of non-communicable diseases, which is responsible for 70% of deaths globally. The Deputy Secretary General noted that with an increasingly globalized world, longer life expectancy, a rapidly changing climate, an increasing level of urbanization, the world is witnessing shifts that are increasing the burden of non-communicable diseases. Also yesterday, she spoke at a high-level dialogue on Africa's health and finance, where she expressed her pride in the tremendous improvements in health across the African continent, but also noted the progress has been slow and uneven. And UNHCR says it's gravely concerned for the safety of tens of thousands of civilians in the northeast part of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, with attacks by armed groups on the rise in Beni, North Kivu province, and further north in the Ituri province. In August alone, some 13,000 people had fled their homes in Beni, and an attack by the ADF NALU last weekend killed more than 20 people, most of them civilians. And in South Sudan, new report released today by the Food and Agriculture Organization, UNICEF, and the World Food Program say relentless conflict and insecurity throughout South Sudan's annual lessons learned has pushed 6.1 million people, nearly 60% of the population, in extreme hunger. The Integrated Food Security Phase Classification Report found that large-scale humanitarian assistance in many areas of the country was the only factor that prevented an even more devastating outcome. 3 agencies call for a sustainable peace across South Sudan, unhindered safe access to all areas where people are fleeing life-saving assistance. And a full report is online. And also on South Sudan, Sorry, no, I'll get to that later. And I'm sorry, not enough coffee today. And last night, the UN Climate Change Secretariat announced 15 recipients of the 2018 UN Momentum for Change Climate Action Awards. They will be recognized for at the climate conference in Poland in Katowice in December. The winners include the creators of a mobile app that promotes the fight against food waste, a football club in the UK promoting sustainable behavior, and an initiative in Sri Lanka to preserve the mangrove forest. More information on the UNCCC's website. Today is the International Day for Universal Access for Information, which calls for ensuring public access to information and protection of fundamental freedoms. It also encourages countries to adopt legislation to develop policies for multilingualism and cultural diversity in cyberspace, and ensuring that women and men with disabilities are integrated. And today is also World Rabies Day, which seeks to raise awareness about rabies prevention and to highlight the progress in defeating this horrendous disease. At 12:30, just in terms of stakeouts, so shortly, there'll be a press encounter at the GA stakeout following this morning's high-level meeting on the transition from peacekeeping to peace-building and development in Darfur. Undersecretary General for Peacekeeping Operations Jean-Pierre Lacroix, the African Union Commissioner for Peace and Security, Ambassador Ismail Shergi, and Ildrindi Mohamed Ahmed, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Sudan, are expected to be present. Also today, 2 p.m., there'll be a briefing here by the Prime Minister of Malaysia, Mahathir bin Mohamad, and at 3:30, there'll be a briefing by the Foreign Minister of Russian Federation, Sergei Lavrov. 8:15 p.m., the leader of the Turkish Cypriot community, Mustafa Akinci, will be at the General Assembly stakeout on the 3rd floor. And Monday at 3 p.m., the President of the General Assembly, Maria Fernanda Espinosa, will be here for a press conference to brief you on the high-level week and discuss her priorities for the 73rd session of the General Assembly. Halas, İri.
Thank you, Steph. Two questions. First, does the UN have any, I'm phrasing this wrong, there was a serious earthquake and tsunami in the Indonesian part of Sulawesi. Has the UN been asked for any assistance?
Not
Has
that I'm
it
aware
offered?
of. As always, we stand ready to help, and our humanitarian colleagues are trying to get some more information. As soon as we have an update, we'll share that with you.
And also, does the Secretary General have any reaction to the announcement by Burundi that it was suspending all non-governmental organizations for several months?
We're obviously taking a look at that decision and its implication. What I can tell you, in fact, because I had something on Indonesia, is that we are in contact with Indonesian authorities and stand ready to provide support as required. The United Nations, of course, expresses its solidarity with the government and people of Indonesia at this challenging time. Joe?
Yeah, two questions. First of all, do you have at least an approximation of the percentage of pledges to UNRWA? What percentage of that money has actually been contributed?
Well, the pledges were just announced.
No,
yesterday.
I mean I understand that. I'm not talking about the.
So the actual
over the year, there have been previous pledging conferences.
I mean, I'll get you the exact numbers, but obviously a pretty good number has now been turned into cash. But I will give you those hard numbers.
And my second question is, Prime Minister Netanyahu yesterday in his address said that Israeli intelligence had identified a second, what they called a second secret atomic warehouse in Tehran. He gave very specific locations and asked for immediate inspection. Would the Secretary General, since he has supported the JCPOA and he's relied on the certification by the IAEA of Iranian compliance, would he think it would be useful to have an immediate inspection and ask the IAEA to do that?
That's a question for the IAEA to answer.
Well, but with all due respect, if you're relying on an assertion of compliance,
I think they're separate. Joe, I think they're separate things here. The IAEA is doing what it has been tasked to do under the JCPOA, and it's been doing that.
But
the request was for the IAEA to investigate, as requested by the Prime Minister of Israel. The question you're asking me is for the IAEA to answer.
But would the Secretary General back that? I mean, does he just?
As I said,
does he think it's a wise thing to do?
As I have to say, it would be for the IAEA to initially answer. Mr. Abadi.
Thank you. The president of the 72nd session, Ambassador Lajdak, Foreign Minister Lajdak, and the president of the 73rd session, Ms. Espinosa, and other delegates in the general debate have called for making the UN pertinent to the people. Does the Secretary General have any specific suggestions on how to do that?
I think it depends where. I think the United Nations can always become more effective, more pertinent, and that's the Secretary General's vision, to ensure that we have an organization that is fit for purpose and that delivers on the needs of people. I think what we do see currently is throughout the world the UN delivering on humanitarian, on development, and on political issues to those people who need it. Sir.
My name is Simon Ateba from Today News Africa. I have two quick, short questions. President Trump said the UN Human Rights Council is a joke, that the UN is a joke, and that you guys have lost any credibility. My first question is, are they not right? Is President Trump not right when you dine and wine with dictators around the world, in Africa, in Cameroon, for instance, having Paul Biya, who has been in power for 36 years, and embracing him and bringing him here? Are they not right that the UN, when it comes to human rights, they have totally failed? That's the first question. The second question, you talked about access to information today, that we are celebrating it. Recently, you banned Matthew Lee from Inner City Press, and he was questioning you about Cameroon, the UN Secretary General. He might have had a different method. Who decide what is right, and who decide?
The question about. Sorry, I'd let you finish first.
Yeah, who decide? Is it not? I mean, who gives you the power to ban people because they are challenging you, because they are questioning you? Did you ban Matthew Lee because he was questioning you about Cameroon, where a dictator has been in power for 36 years, and you ban a journalist who is asking you a question about him? Is that right? Does it make sense to you?
First of all, we've answered the question about Mr. Lee repeatedly, and we've also answered Mr. Lee's questions repeatedly. Can I just? I'll let you finish. If you could let me finish. We've also answered his questions repeatedly for the last 12 years, and we continue to answer the questions that he emails in. His accreditation was revoked purely for having repeatedly violated the rules, the accreditation rules, which are transparent and which you all agree to abide by, which are, frankly, most of them are self-policing, and it had nothing to do whatsoever with the content of his writings or the questions that he's asking.
No, I mean, what do you mean banning him for life? What does it mean?
That's not an expression that anyone from here has ever used, and I think I've answered your question on Mr. Lee. The United Nations is organizations of 193 member states. It is very important that during the General Assembly, as many heads of states and heads of governments convene here. I think this year we'll get the final number, but we had about 120 or 122 heads of states or government who have all signed on to the Charter, who have all signed on to the ideals of the Charter. For the Secretary General, it's very important that the United Nations has its convening power, that he is able to dialogue with all heads of states and heads of governments, which doesn't mean that he will not, either him or his High Commissioner for Human Rights or any other senior UN officials, will call out, express concern about certain violations of universal human rights. Stefano.
Yes, I want to go back to the Tuesday and the speeches given by Secretary General Guterres and President Trump. I mean, many of us concentrate on who was laughing and for what, but reality is that in years, maybe ever, we saw two speeches so opposite. Means President Trump's speech was saying exactly, totally the contrary than what Secretary General Guterres had just said. What was, if you can tell us, the reaction, what is the reaction of the Secretary General to what President Trump said against multilateralism, against anything had to do with the collaboration of nations, that, for what I understood, nations now had to think just to themselves?
When the Secretary General spoke, and he spoke right after the PGA, President of General Assembly, he spoke to outline his beliefs, his policies. He was not speaking out against 1, 2, 3, or 4, or 5 or 6 different member states. He was outlining the policies and the positions that, frankly, most of them he's had for a long, long time. And that's his responsibility, and that's exactly what he did.
Sorry, maybe it was me. My question was not formulated well. I'm not criticizing Secretary General's
I'm not taking it as a criticism.
No, what I'm saying is, after, unfortunately, it was the way around. Like first spoke Trump, and then Secretary General.
No. The Secretary General spoke first.
I understand.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I say, it wasn't the way around. What I'm saying
maybe
is,
not so unfortunately.
No, because maybe President Guterres could have said something. The point is, President Trump, the president of the country that was the pillar of the formation of the United Nations. Without the United States, the United Nations will not be created. We will not have it. He did a speech that in the history of this institution, 70 years, well, it was totally the contrary to what Secretary General said. And the question is, there is a reaction on this speech by the Secretary General?
I will leave. The Secretary General is not in the job of reacting and commenting on every speech that was given. The compare and contrast exercise is for you to do. The Secretary General laid out his vision, his position, and there's really nothing surprising in what in the fact that he laid out those positions. Carla.
Last night, President Maduro met with the Secretary General.
Yep.
It was my understanding that this was regarding a military buildup in Colombia, Peru, Chile, and Brazil, which was threatening to Venezuela. Could you give us some information about that meeting and what is the reaction to...
What the Secretary General and President Maduro discussed the situation in Venezuela and in the region. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I have a follow-up question.
Yes, ma'am.
Also, there were multiple meetings on tuberculosis. Was any comment made either at the meetings or by the United Nations about the Global Fund to combat malaria, AIDS, and tuberculosis cutting funding to North Korea? Because
the meeting was open, so I mean, I didn't monitor the meeting, but I'm sure it's archived on the webcast. You can see what was said.
Has the UN any reaction to that?
I think we've already spoken about our humanitarian commitment to the DPRK. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. I'm coming to Balkans.
Yeah.
The General Secretary met the Premier Minister of Serbia, and she's back home. And then, according to the media, the General Secretary said to her that Kosovo is not a country, even a state. I would like to know what is the meaning of General Secretary. What is Kosovo?
The status of Kosovo is outlined in the relevant Security Council resolutions, and which is our guidance. We put out a readout of the meeting, and for us, we stand by that readout. Yes, sir.
Just to follow up on what Sir was asking earlier, how is it that the UN can be expected to act efficiently when perhaps the two most important men or persons in the UN think completely differently, as was stated with the narrative of the Secretary General and President Donald Trump?
The United Nations is made up of 193 member states. For his part, the Secretary General, I think, has a very constructive relationship with the U.S. government. The U.S. cooperates with the UN on a number of critical issues. And he, in fact, has, I would say, a very warm personal relationship with the President of the United States. Obviously, different countries have different positions, and it is their right to implement their policies and to push for those policies. Thank you. We will see you Monday.